Welcome to Diving Deep into Government Efficiency. It's a topic that I think we're all feeling right now, especially with all these changes coming down the pipe. I'm really excited about what DOGE could potentially do.
Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm definitely interested to see what comes of it all. It's one thing to talk about efficiency, but actually making it happen in the real world, that's the big question for me.
Right, and I'm coming at this from a place of skepticism, I guess. Utopian future is a great buzzword, but we have a system for a reason, and I think we need to be careful about throwing everything out the window.
I get that skepticism, I really do. But you have to admit, the status quo isn't exactly working wonders for everyone either. I mean, look at the articles coming out. The Marsha Blackburn report, the Oklahoma stuff about wasted spending. All of it points to a system ripe for disruption. And who better than Elon, and maybe Vivek, to kind of shake things up?
Okay, well, on that point, the Oklahoma thing is really interesting, right? They're asking people to just send in their complaints. Like, hey, government, where's all my money going? That's kind of wild, honestly. But on the flip side, that sounds really populist, right? Like, they're making an effort to include the common man, which is definitely needed in our current climate.
Well, it is, but also it's pretty much admitting that they have no idea where the money's going. I mean, isn't that concerning in itself? Like, the very people in charge need to ask the general public about where they think the waste is.
I see it differently. I think it's more about tapping into the collective consciousness. You know, the people on the ground often see things the bureaucrats don't. Yes, it does highlight a failure, but think of it as a collective audit where everyone gets a say. Plus, it gives people a sense of ownership in this process. It's like decentralized government auditing. How cool is that?
Decentralized government auditing. I mean, okay, I see where you're going with that. But realistically, I can just see people sending in a bunch of random complaints and then nothing changes. Will that actually streamline anything? I guess we'll see when they sift through the mountains of data. What's going to be the filtering process?
Exactly my point. It sounds like chaos to me. We have checks and balances, committees, experts, and instead we are going to a send in your complaints model. That just sounds like populism gone wild. I think that while people do have valuable input, the level of detail required for effective change is unlikely to come from the public. We risk implementing policies based on emotions rather than on data and analysis. There's a reason these things are in place. There are professionals who study these things.
But isn't that the point, though? To move away from these rigid structures that are clearly not working? I mean, the experts clearly haven't fixed the issue, have they? Look at the Marsha Blackburn report. It's talking about the DOGE Acts, tying it all together with Elon and Vivek. It's like a whole new paradigm of accountability. They want to tie the cutting of wasteful spending to a whole new initiative led by actual builders. And that, in itself, is the disruption we need.
Okay, the actual builder's part. I see where you're coming from, but I'm also a bit wary. Like, are these guys who have made their money in tech and other places really equipped to handle the intricacies of something like government efficiency? It's not like they're just building another car or a social media platform, right? This is people's lives and livelihood we are talking about.
Thank you, exactly. And the DOGE Acts. I mean, come on, is that a serious name? It sounds like a joke. It's like we're in some weird reality TV show or something, and now Congress is getting involved naming acts after a joke. That kind of undermines the importance of the serious task of government spending.
I think you are underestimating it. They aren't just building cars. They're building systems. Tesla has revolutionized car manufacturing. SpaceX is changing the space industry. Well, it's definitely changing something. They're not just good at specific fields. They're problem solvers. They can see the system as a whole and find the inefficiencies that those inside are blind to. And the DOGE Acts is branding. It gets people talking, and that's half the battle, right?
Branding is one thing, but I do wonder about the long-term impact of this approach. I mean, if they're just slashing budgets left and right, what about the people who rely on those services? Like in the Oklahoma article, they talk about investing in critical government services. How much of that is going to make up for the slashing Elon wants to do? And what happens if we just go from inefficient to just underfunded? I mean, it's all well and good to want to cut waste, but what happens to the everyday person when the programs are cut? It is something that needs to be addressed before it all gets put into action.
Exactly. This is where the reality of actually governing comes into play, not just some billionaire's grand vision. The article about experts' advice to DOGE is spot on, focusing on effectiveness, not just efficiency. We can cut spending to the bone, but if the government is not asterisk effective asterisk, then we're making the lives of the general public worse. This isn't just about numbers. It's about real-world outcomes. The real question is, how will Elon and Vivek really measure true effectiveness? I doubt their solution is to just slash budgets and hope for the best.
See, that makes sense in theory, but, you know how slow government IT upgrades are. It's not like they can just install a new operating system overnight. That's going to take time, and it's going to cost money. And while they're upgrading, things could get messy. I just worry about the middle person, you know? The guy who is already struggling to make ends meet, is this going to make their life better or more difficult? That is what I care about the most.
Exactly. And that's not even the whole IT story. It's not just about hardware and software. It's about data security, training, and integration. They want to cut costs, but these types of upgrades will come with significant expenses, which could end up being more than what they save initially, not to mention potential errors during the transition. I've had to deal with IT updates in the private sector, and it is never as smooth as you would expect. And those were small companies. Imagine the entire US government.
But aren't we looking at it the wrong way? I think the problem is not the scale, it's the thinking behind it. Think about what Elon does with Tesla. They do everything in-house. They manufacture their own machines and components, and they write their own software. What if, instead of hiring contractors and having multiple companies working on various parts of an upgrade, they had a team who completely owned the stack? That would be the most efficient way, right? And it might come with the initial investment, but it will also have long-term savings. Think about the lack of compatibility, the security risks, and the lack of accountability we have right now. This would eliminate those issues.
That's actually an interesting idea, but, that would involve a massive overhaul. I'm not sure even Elon could convince the entire government to adopt that model. And again, what happens if something goes wrong? Are they going to have a tech support for all the US government employees? It just feels like we might be going from a system with known issues to a whole new system with a whole set of unknown issues. I'm not against change, but I do think that the current system has some protections in place, and getting rid of them and trying to invent a new government might be chaotic and dangerous.
And that's the fear. It's not about being resistant to change. It's about change without proper planning and thought into it. And this isn't just about IT. It's about every facet of the government. For example, the article about Elon and Vivek's targets, they want to simplify the tax code. But if that's possible, it would have happened already. A simple tax code doesn't mean that it's good tax code. It's not as easy as just shrinking the number of pages. You have to consider its impacts on different groups. This is the level of detail and complexity that I think people underestimate.
But you're focusing on the difficulties instead of the potential wins, you know. The tax code example. Americans spend 6.5 billion hours on tax preparation every year. That's insane. If DOGE is able to simplify the system and give people back that time and, more importantly, the peace of mind that they're not going to be audited or accidentally underpay, that would be huge. Imagine the amount of productivity unleashed.
Okay, I hear you on that one. Simplifying the tax code would be amazing. But on the other hand, isn't there a chance that these changes would primarily benefit corporations and the wealthy instead of the average person? The wealthy usually find ways to navigate the tax system, so would simplified tax code really change things for them? Is there a chance that it becomes simpler to avoid paying taxes and then the burden would shift to the average person?
That's a valid point. Simplifying for simplification's sake is not the goal. We should strive for something that is easy to understand and fair for all citizens. I'm not sure that Elon's model is that focused on fairness. The article also points to things like cutting foreign aid and attacking the NIH spending and the Pentagon. These are huge policy decisions with far-reaching implications. And that's what I'm concerned with, that DOGE is going to focus on cost cutting, not on the best outcome for the country.
But aren't we spending way too much on things that don't serve the American people? The article mentions $516 billion on expired programs. $516 billion. Imagine what good could be done with that kind of money if it was invested in infrastructure, green energy, or education, or even tax cuts. And yes, I know the article mentions that they want to protect Medicare and Social Security. But what about the wastage that doesn't reach the people who need it?
See, that's exactly it. It's all about reprioritizing what is important rather than just cutting indiscriminately. But again, the big question is, how do you decide what is important? And will these decisions be made with the average person in mind? Or will it be a case of the powerful looking after themselves? I can see a world where all these cuts end up affecting the working classes more than those in high positions. I'm hopeful that they will be effective, but I am also worried for my neighbors.
Well, that is also the case, but also what happens if there is no investment in some areas. The thing with programs is that they are sometimes essential, even if we don't see the direct benefit. The fact that they are going to be led by people who don't seem to have any government experience is also something that should be considered. And it's easy to point fingers at the bureaucracy and call it inefficient. But these institutions often exist for a reason. They are set up to balance all these competing interests and make sure the country keeps running, even if it seems slow and frustrating. But we need to remember that it wasn't built by accident.
I think that's a very fair point, but it's not like the government is working perfectly now, and we just need to make tiny adjustments. Bernie Sanders himself supports Elon's DOGE approach to the Pentagon, highlighting its waste and inefficiency. It's like a sign that even those on the left see the potential of what Elon can achieve in this space. They both want to cut back on military spending, which has been a point of debate for years. That kind of bipartisan support has to mean something, right? It opens a pathway for a future where both sides could agree on certain points.
That is interesting, you know? To have Bernie Sanders support the DOGE approach. That does kind of make you think twice. But I'm still wary about the whole thing being driven by these very wealthy guys. It just feels a little like the fox guarding the henhouse, you know? I do see the potential to finally fix some of the things that we all know are broken. It's just that it all feels too good to be true, or too simple to be true. I also see that there could be some political moves being made where the powerful are trying to benefit from the proposed changes.
And I think that is the biggest concern. The fact that DOGE is looking at things like diversity and outreach in the NIH and trying to cut that is deeply worrying. These programs are meant to address real societal issues, and using efficiency as an excuse to eliminate them is morally wrong, in my opinion. And the constant attacks on government workers, if all the experienced people leave because of the changes, then who are we left with? There needs to be experience in there. It can't just be Elon's personal ES people. And if that's what happens, then we've lost even if we do save money. And that's the worry, that we are focusing on the money first and the outcome second.
But isn't that the point, to create a paradigm shift? We need to move away from the idea that government workers are essential, and maybe bring in systems that can do more with fewer people. You know, automation. I mean, think of how many roles could be automated in the government, and that will free up resources for other programs and for new initiatives. The goal is to free up human creativity and skill to do more important things, right?
I hear you, I do, but automation also means job losses. And the government is one of the biggest employers, so how are we going to support all these people if there are massive layoffs? And again, it goes back to the point. If the focus of the changes is automation, it may benefit the tech giants who create these products. How can the average person know that these changes are actually for them rather than just making others more wealthy? It's just, I get the feeling that if we just cut and automate, that will go from inefficient to, I don't know, heartless.
Heartless, that's a good way to put it. And automation, while it sounds great, is not a magic bullet. It still requires oversight, maintenance, and people who understand the system. And if we are going to be cutting corners, then the automation might not be as reliable. It just feels like we are just swapping out one problem for another, potentially bigger problem. I also think that we, as a society, need to put value into the types of work government employees do. They do provide an essential service. I think we should value these jobs and make them better, rather than automate them and just have more people struggling for work.
But I think that's a very narrow way of looking at it. The potential here is for something truly transformative. It is not about cutting, it's about optimizing. I mean, imagine a government that's as efficient and agile as a startup, able to react quickly to the needs of the people. That isn't weighed down by bureaucracy. That's the future I see with DOGE. And sure, there will be challenges, there will be setbacks, but the potential is too great to ignore. The amount of money that can be put back into programs or given back to the people would be huge. And we would all benefit from this. Not just the powerful or wealthy.
I guess we'll have to see if that's how it plays out, but I'm still not convinced, you know. It's a massive risk to put so much power in the hands of a few individuals. But, like I said at the start, it's important to see what happens. I hope that those in power will listen to the average person and ensure that the changes benefit us all. I still think the best way to move forward is incrementally, and that we ensure no one gets left behind.
And I think that's where I stand too. I appreciate the enthusiasm, I really do. But we have to be realistic. Change needs to be well thought out, balanced, and it needs to have the best interests of the entire country at heart, not just cost savings. And my fear is that DOGE, in its current state, is just a way for the wealthy to become more wealthy and powerful, at the cost of the middle and working classes. And that it might ultimately damage the system we have, which is still the best in the world. I think we just need to ensure that those in power actually have the common people in their minds, rather than profit.
Well, I guess we'll see what the future holds then. It's certainly going to be an interesting time, and I am excited to see what changes will occur. It definitely sparks debate and brings the topic of government efficiency to the forefront of conversation, and that in itself is a good thing.
Yeah, it definitely is a talking point, and we will be watching closely to see how it develops and what impact it has on the everyday person.
Agreed. We'll all be watching, and I hope that there will be careful consideration of all consequences, both positive and negative.